Good evening and welcome, and thank you all for joining us. And it's hard to believe what is the fourth Yahrzeit of our dear friend Baruch Tzvi ben Ruvei Nassan, Rabbi Dr. Rabbi Galbut, Zichrono Livracha. I want to express profound appreciation to the Galbot family for bringing us together and giving us this opportunity to learn, to grow, and most of all to remember, and to do it all in the memory of our beloved friend. I urge them to find a new speaker each year. I'm unsuccessful, but I'm trying. But I want to express my appreciation for the opportunity. It's 4 years, but I don't know that there's a day that goes by that all of us who knew and loved and learned and admired Brian don't continue to hear his voice ringing in our ears, and don't hear ourselves asking ourselves, what would Brian do? And how would he react? And how would he respond? And how would he stay positive? I have the great schus on Wednesday mornings to give a Living with Emunah shir, generously sponsored by incredible people in Israel who did so in memory of Brian. So I have the chance to invoke his name every Wednesday. And I don't know that there's a shir whose title couldn't fit more with his name and his memory. To live with emunah, that's who he was. That's how he lived. That's what he demonstrated, not lip service, and not when all was well and easy and good, but it's what he demonstrated in the hardest of situations, the most trying of circumstances. From the inconsequential, insignificant little things of life to life itself, Brian was a living role model, a living Musar sefer of what it meant to live with emunah. And his memory continues to live not only because of the indelible impression he left and leaves on all of us in this room and well beyond, but he lives most through you, his beloved children and his family. Every interaction, every smile, every hug, every handshake, every regaling of a golf story or a golf shot, and more significantly of a Dvar Torah, that's your father, who is very, very, very much alive through each of you, through the mannerisms, and through the appearance, but most of all, through the values. So let's learn a sugya together. I want to learn a story that's familiar, but maybe take a few angles that are not. Ask some questions, maybe they've bothered you before, maybe not. And understand this story and see it. Really, I think the lessons that we need to glean and to learn if we want to not be sitting on the floor tomorrow night and Thursday, if we want Mashiach to come and we want to be reunited with Brian and all others that we love and sorely miss, that we need to repair, and we need to fix, and we need to finally get right. The story is familiar. It's a Gemara in Gittin, and Daf Nun Hey, Daf Nun Vav. It appears as well in the Medrash and Eicha. It's on the bottom in source number 2. Again, if you don't have the source booklets, I apologize. You could share. If you're watching online, the link is in the comments so you can follow along. But the Gemara in Gittin tells the following story. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, what does the pasuk mean? Fortunate is the person that always fears the consequences, understands being roa es hanolad, the result of what we do, and whose hardens his heart will come to harm. This pasuk in the Gemara illustrates 3 episodes, 3 stories, 3 tragedies that struck because people failed to consider the consequence of their action. They lived in that moment. They acted impetuously and impulsively instead of understanding that our behavior and our choices, they yield results, and some of them can build and be wonderful and uplift, or they can destroy. Akamsa ubar kamsa charav Yerushalayim. We're all familiar with the story. Let's review it again. Nonetheless, I reviewed it recently. Brian's beloved Daf Yomi and some who in this room are well on their way to finishing an entire cycle of Shas, all at his urging. And every day they learn in his merit. Akamsa ubar kamsa charav Yerushalayim, as a result of the incident, because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Yerushalayim was destroyed. Now that's pretty bold, that's pretty brazen to attribute the entire destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, this calamity, this tragedy, All because of these two people, Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. That's giving a lot of responsibility or credit to them. And two other stories, Tarnagolo, Tarnagolosa, Charav Tur Malka, Sakta Rispa, Charav Beitar, stories for another time. But the first story, Akamsa, Bar Kamsa, Charav Yerushalayim. Tahu Gavra, there was a certain person, Derachme Kamsa, Ubal Davave Bar Kamsa. He was Rachme, the word Rachme is Rachamim. It means he was a compassionate companion. He was a friend of Kamsa, but simultaneously, he was a Baal Debave, he was an enemy. He was an adversary. He had tension, he had beef, he had friction with Bar Kamsa. Now, those names are obviously very similar, Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, easily mistaken. Avad Su'udasa, so the person, this Gavra, made a meal, made a banquet. What was he celebrating? Gemara doesn't tell us. Bris, Bar Mitzvah, a wedding, a Siyam, a Suda Sada. What was he marking? What was he celebrating? We don't know. It was a Suda. Significant. We'll come back to it. Zil Aisele Kamsa. So he told, they didn't have e-invite, they didn't print paper invite. You sent agents who would go knock on the door and tell people that they're invited. So he said, go and bring Kamsa to join me at the banquet. Goes Aisele Bar Kamsa. But there was a miscommunication, a mistake. The names are so close, so interchangeable, that the agent, the shliach, went and invited Bar Kamsa, the adversary, the enemy, instead of inviting Kamsa, the dear and beloved companion and friend. Also, Ashkechei Dave Yosef, he found, when the host arrived at the banquet, he found Bar Kamsa sitting there. Amalei, he said to Bar Kamsa, Mechtehu Gavra Baldavava Adahu Gavru. This person, you're the enemy of that man, me. He spoke in euphemisms, but he said, what are you doing here? Like you and I, we don't talk. We haven't spoken in years. We're arch enemies. We're sworn enemies. Everybody knows you can't seat us at a simcha next to each other. Don't invite us for Shabbos together. Everyone knows we don't get along. This is my Suda. I showed up to my banquet. What are you doing here? My bayisach. Kumpuk, get up and get out. Leave. You don't belong. You're not wanted. So Amalei Bar Kamsa said, Hov asai shavkan. Okay, listen. I know we have a history. I know when you get along. But everybody in the room right now is staring at us. They know our history. Maybe they were surprised I was here. But if I get up and walk out now, then it's obvious to all that I've been kicked out, that you pushed me out. And I'll tell you what, I'll cover the cost. I had a few sushi, I hit the carving station, I know it's for the main, I had a glass of wine, I'll cover it all. I'll cover my expenses. Amalei, the host said to Bar Kamsa, no, you got to get out. I don't want you. You're ruining my entire enjoyment of the evening just by being here. Amalei. So Bar Kamsa said, look, it will be so humiliating, so embarrassing, socially set me so far back, lead to such shalom bayis problems at home. I'll pay for half the expenses of the entire event. Forget to cover my costs. I'll cover half the expenses, party planner and all. Amalei, the host said, no. So Amalei Bar Kamsa said, okay, desperate. I'll tell you what, I'll pay everything. This will be a free thing. You're the host. You'll get all the accolades. You'll get all the gifts. You'll get all the pat on the back. I'll cover the cost. No one needs to know. Just please, I beg of you, let me stay. Amalei, the host said, no. So what happened? He grabbed hold of Bar Kamsa with his hand, took him by the collar. You could picture the image. He stood him up. He walked him to the door, and he threw him on the street. Everybody's watching. Omar Bar Kamsa, now sitting on the curb, dusting himself off, humiliated and embarrassed. He says to himself, this guy's my adversary. We already don't talk. We're already sworn arch enemies. I can't have any more beef with him. But I cannot believe that everyone else just sat there and allowed that to happen. I can't believe they were complicit. I can't believe that they allowed it. The Rabbanon, the rabbis, the leaders, supposedly the righteous, and they sat there passively. They were accomplices to such humiliating behavior. Shmami nakanachilu. It must be, if they didn't say anything, if they stayed silent, if they were complicit, they were okay with the way I was just treated. So, time for revenge. I'm going to go out and spread slander against the rabbis. In the palace, he went and he told the Caesar, whether the Caesar directly or the Mefarshim say, some Roman official, the Jews are rebelling against you. In other words, who was ready to burn down the whole palace, the whole city. He was going to take the whole Jewish community down. So he said, the Jews are rebelling against you. Amalei, the Caesar said to him, Miyemar, who says so? What's your evidence? What's your proof? That's a huge accusation to level. Amalei Bar Kamsa said, Shedarlu Korbana, send them an animal. Non-Jews are allowed to send sacrifices to the Beis HaMikdash. Send the Korban Ola. We sing on the Yom Noraim. We long for Vaviyosem. We want it to be a place which is holy. L'chol ha'amim. It's not only the Beis HaMikdash, a place for sacrifices for Jews. It's l'chol ha'amim. It is the capital of korbanos, of sacrifice, of closeness and connection to Hashem for all the nations. So he said, let's go see. You're eligible to send an animal. See if they take it. See whether they take it or not. Also, he sent a fine calf with Bar Kamsa, as he was going to Yerushalayim. Bar Kamsa caused a blemish in the upper lip, and Amrila Bedukan Sheba'ayin. Some say he caused an injury to the eye. Mefarshim jump on this. It wasn't coincidental. If you want to create a mum in an animal, first of all, these are funny mumim to create. What exactly is the cat? You cause a cataract in the eye, and is that a mum? Why did he choose the eye and the lips? Perhaps it was a metaphor, it was a message for what he had just experienced. What do the eye and the lips have to do with anything? What does one do with their lips is the power of speech. That's where you can uplift and build and compliment, or you could destroy and denigrate and insult and criticize and condemn. His host could have used his lips to say, okay, you can stay. Instead, he used his lips to say, get out. Those who were present, the Rabbanan who sat there, they could have spoken up and spoken out. They could have used their voice to object to that behavior. Instead, they allowed their lips to stay silent. Why the eye? Because your eye could be used for an ayin tova or ayin ra'ah. You could use your eye to see generously, to open up your heart to be generous, to look the other way, to be mevater, to allow even your enemy to stay rather than face humiliation. Or your eye can be stingy and jealous and envious, see everything that's wrong with the other. So the ayin ra'ah that was exhibited rather than the ayin tova, perhaps Bar Kamsa, by specifically trying to create the blemish that would disqualify the korban in the eye or the lips, was sending a message that the Jewish people, there was a mum in Klal Yisrael. We were disqualified. We were bali mumin. We had a mum in our lips, in our failure to speak up when it was necessary, and using our lips to gossip and slander and criticize and marginalize and condemn. And we failed to see with an ayin tova positively, we used an ayin ra'ah negatively. So he disqualified the animal. And what happened? Either way, he ensured the blemish was in a place where it was a blemish. It would be disqualified. That it was considered a blemish for us, for Klal Yisrael, for the Jewish people, but not for them, for offering outside the temple. The Rabbanan considered offering it Mishim Shalom Malchus. So they get this animal, it's disqualified, it came from a Roman governor. If you disqualify, you are insulting your oppressor, the Roman governor, with grave consequences. So they considered maybe for the sake of peace and for the sake of continuity, we should accept it. Rav Zachari ben Akula said, you can't do that. If you compromise, if you allow yourself to be corrupt, people will misunderstand, they'll misinterpret, and they'll offer blemished animals. So Savra Lemikdale said, you know what, we got to kill Bar Kamsa. We got to take him out. What justification would there be to take him out? So Meiri writes, he was a rodef, someone who's a moser, someone who's willing to turn you over and risk the survival of the Jewish people, has forfeited their life. So they will not be able to go and tell Caesar. But again, Rabbi Zachariah says, people will think it's a capital crime when you bring an animal that has a mum, and they'll misunderstand the halacha, and we can't afford to compromise the halacha. And Rabbi Yochanan, the punchline of the story is that on V'nasuso shel Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkulas, his tolerance, his humility, his staying quiet and silent, his tolerance, refusing to put Bar Kamsa to death, Hechriva es Beisenu, it destroyed our Beis HaMikdash, V'sarfa es Heichaleinu, and it burned down our Heichal, V'higlisonu me'artzeinu, and it is responsible for exiling us from our land. It's a familiar story. We've all heard it before. Gersh, can you just pass me the tissues, please? We've all heard it before. So, but the story has many question marks on it. Thank you so much. The story has many question marks on it. Most notable of which is, who does the Gemara attribute the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the ultimate exile of our people, the loss of so many lives? Whom do we blame it on? Kamsa? Bar Kamsa. Bar Kamsa's role in the story, We just read, we just saw. What did Kamsa do? Who's Kamsa? Was he even at the party? Did he even make the cut? Did he make the invitation? Did he find his way there? Was he even there? Bar Kamsa was the sworn enemy. Bar Kamsa made a whole to-do. Bar Kamsa tried to take revenge and was willing to risk the safety and security of the Jewish people. Bar Kamsa is to blame. What did Kamsa do? Who's Kamsa? And what did he do? And why was he there? It's interesting in source number 3 on page 2, in Josephus' War of the Jews, he tells over this story, and he talks about how they took it like treasure. He talks about they used to bring sacrifices, and Elazar, the son of Ananias, the high priest, who was at the time governor of the temple, persuaded those officials in divine service to receive a gift or sacrifice for any foreigner. He has another different version of it. But the Maharal is bothered by this. And the Maharal says, you know why this was responsible for the story? Maharal is bothered by a more fundamental question, which is, this is it? You're telling me that millions of Jews who lost their lives in the Churban, who were slaughtered, innocent men, women, and children died, not because of their own unworthiness, not because they deserved it, but rather because of some petty fight that broke out at a party and the wrong reaction and behavior, and that led to the slaughter of so many? Is that the God that we believe in? That these innocent people died because a couple petty people, an invitation got mixed up and a petty fight resulted? Says the Maharal, no. Says Rabbi Dr. of Prague. Look at the Maharal inside. And we'll try to move relatively quickly through these sources. Each of the 3 stories corresponds with parts of the destruction, and they all correlate. So, the role of Yerushalayim, it's Ir Shechubra Lo Yachad. Yerushalayim is the united city. It's the united capital, undivided, eternal capital of the Jewish people. And it's a city that unites Jews from around the world. Wherever we are and wherever we daven, we face the same place, Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is Ir Shechubra Lo Yachad. It is a place of unity, and it is a place of harmony, and it is a place of togetherness. It is a place of commonality. We have one Beis HaMikdash. Maybe there are 12 entrances, and the 13th, the Shara Kolel. Maybe each Shevet had their own entry into the Beis HaMikdash, but ultimately we come to one campus, one community, one centerpiece, one Mizbeach, one place of worship. The Beis HaMikdash was the great unifier, the great uniter of Klal Yisrael. One Sanhedrin, one Kohen Gadol, one Mizbeach. And once we were fighting, when there was no harmony, when we were divided, when we were judging and criticizing and marginalizing and condemning, then Yerushalayim fell apart. Because Yerushalayim reflects us. Yerushalayim is a projection, is a mirror of who we are and how we are living. And when we are united, Yerushalayim is whole, the Mizbeach is whole. But when we're divided and when we're fighting, when we're jealous and we're envious, when we're angry, when we're hypercritical, when we condemn one another, when we neglect one another, when we're unkind, we're cruel, we're insensitive to one another, then Yerushalayim can't tolerate us. So Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, which is a paradigmatic story of conflict, of petty fighting, of the inability to be mevater. Rabbi Shteinman Zatzal said, Na ra'isi v'gam zakanti, v'lo ra'isi mevater. He says, I never saw a mevater lose out, Yahrzeit. Na ra'isi v'gam zakanti. I was young and I was old, and I never, in a play on words of the pasuk we say at the end of benching, from when I was young till I was old, I never saw a mevater lose out. A mevater means someone who's foregoing, who's willing to let go, who's flexible, who says, you know what? All right, I was invited, it was a mistake, I'm asked to leave. All right, okay, I'm insulted, I'm hurt, I'll go cry on my pillow for a few minutes and I'll move on. I'm not going to take down the Jewish people. I'm not going to make a mountain of oil. I'm not going to escalate this. Person has to be a mevater, and Kamsa Bar Kamsa is the ultimate story of the exact opposite, to be exacting and to be fighting and to seek revenge. And that's why it's called Kamsa, says the Maharal. Because what is a Kamsa? A kometz is a fist, and a fist includes what's inside to the exclusion of everything that's outside that fist. It is set off, it is segregated, it is secluded from everything outside that fist. Different. We're apart. We're separate. We're enemies. We're adversaries. You're the other. That's when we have sinas chinam, is when a person becomes the other. Achzarius, Rav Wolbe says, when do we exhibit achzarius, cruelty? When the other person is zar, they're just a stranger. They're the other. They're a stranger to me. They're the other party. I don't connect with them. I don't have anything in common with them. They're not familiar to me. We have no common ground. Zar, they're just a stranger. And when someone is just a stranger, you can practice being an achzarius. You're cruel to the person who you've relegated to just be a stranger. So kamtza and bar kamtza, kometz, is creating this paradigm, this divide, this barrier between oneself and the other. This story that escalates. Lefichach amar kamtza bar kamtza chav Yerushalayim ki ein safek. Their names came about because that's who they were. Their names are a description of how they lived. They lived in cliques. A kamtza, a fist, closed. You can't break in. We sit together. We have Shabbos meals together. We, at Simchas, take pictures together. Everything, we're a clique. You can't break into our clique. And you can't believe that adults can also have cliques. It doesn't end in the teenage years who sits together at lunch at school. Adults have cliques. And they leave people out, and they hurt people's feelings. We post pictures that we go out to celebrate together, and you think everybody who sees the picture, who was invited to the drinks for the birthday, I'm so happy for them. Or the first reaction, I wasn't invited. I didn't know. I guess I'm not as close a friend as I thought I was. Are we sensitive to the impact that we're having on others? A kamtza ubar kamtza, when we create a kometz, when we set ourselves off as a clique, do we realize that maybe we're just showing off our enjoyable evening, but how many people did we hurt who thought they were part of our inner circle, but they're not in our kometz? They're not inside our fist, our barrier. Says the Maharal, what did Kamtza do wrong? Bar Kamtza, I understand, he was party to this conflict, but what did Kamtza do wrong? Says the Maharal, you have to know, so the host of the party didn't get along with Bar Kamtza, but he had a really close friend called Kamtza. Maybe Kamtza should have said to the host, I'm not comfortable coming to your party that leaves someone out. I'm not coming to your party that you'll uninvite or disinvite or ignore or neglect, and that you don't have to invite the whole world to your party. You got to get along. You got to figure out how to get in a room together. Kamtza could have used his friendship to heal the relationship between the host and Bar Kamtza, but Kamtza didn't. You know why? He was in the kometz. He was in the clique. He made the cut for the birthday dinner. He got the picture with the dessert. So he didn't need to say anything. You have enemies? That's not my business. I don't have to get involved. I don't have to touch it. I don't want to lose this friendship. I don't want to go down and create friction. Says the Maharal, that's why Yerushalayim was destroyed. Yerushalayim, the city of Achta, says it's not good enough to say I don't want to get involved. One can't be party. One can't be an accomplice. One can't be a passive spectator to pirud and machlokas. If you're not solving and healing the machlokas, you are contributing and causing it. He was happy. Kamtza also had the name Kamtza because he made the kometz. He was on the inside. That was good enough for him. The Maharal goes on. You could read the rest yourself, and he describes that's why the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Sinas Chinam, the story of Kamtza Bar Kamtza, was not the catalyst or the cause. It didn't precipitate the actual destruction, but it was emblematic. It's the symbol. It is the storyline of the entire generation. You can cut and paste, replace the names, but this is the storyline. This is the story, if you look at what's posted, of all those of that generation who were excluding others who weren't in their kometz. The world was divided between Kamtza and Bar Kamtza, the host who's on the inside and who's on the outside. And Yerushalayim, the Mizbeach, the holiest city that is predicated and based and has to be on the foundation of unity and camaraderie and connection and love and respect and tolerance and the ability to be mavata. Yerushalayim can't exist in such a way. And so it was destroyed, and we continue to suffer from this until this day. Rav Amital, Rosh Hashiva of the Gush, in source 5, based on the Rambam and Moreh Nevuchim in source 6, he says, the Torah never tells us exactly where the Beis HaMikdash was to be built. It's to the place, to the place that you would go seek, you would search. Why? Give us the coordinates. Let's plug in the address to Waze. How did you know where to go? And the Rambam quotes in the Moreh Nevuchim 3 reasons why the Torah intentionally omits the address. The first 2 answers relate to the potential reaction of the other nations. If they had learned the site of the Beis Hamikdash in advance, they would have immediately concentrated their forces there or destroyed the chosen city. And we know that to be true, because that's the whole world. They could really care less unless we want it. And once we want it, now all of a sudden they care. So the Torah did not list the address, so the nations of the world wouldn't all rush and compete to try to steal it out from under us. But the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim gives a third answer. And he says, Bnei Yisrael themselves, were they to have known which city was chosen as the site of the Beit HaMikdash, the tribes, the Shvatim, would begin fighting with one another, each demanding the city be included in their region. But Yerushalayim, the symbol of national unity, has no right to exist if it causes friction and hatred among the Jewish people. So that we wouldn't fight over it, its address wasn't listed until it was time to set it up, to establish it, and to live there. Yerushalayim is Ir Shechu B'la Yachtav. And if we want to see it rebuilt, and if we want to see ourselves there, and if we want to be reunited with all those we love, then we've got to figure out a way to have unity. Unity doesn't demand uniformity. We don't have to all be the same. We don't have to vote the same, observe the same, dress the same, send our kids to the same schools. We don't have to be the same. We don't have to be uniform, but we do have to have unity. We have to love, not only like, but we have to love, a verb, one another, have each other's backs, be there, practice kindness, not cruelty, and sensitivity, and find commonality, and see that Tzelem Elokim in each and every person. And did we have a better Rebbe who taught us unity, if not uniformity, than Brian, whose whole life was about unity? You walk into a room, and everybody who magnetically was drawn to want to feel connected and close, who wanted to feel his energy, and the most diverse walks of life felt connected, that Brian Galbot was their guy, their friend, their role model. The most diverse walks of life, not only within Orthodoxy, a Torah world, among the whole Jewish people, observant, non-observant. Not only the Torah and the Jewish world, non-Jewish patients, who he was a mentor and a guide and an example, because he just felt connected. He could find commonality. He saw the best and the Tzelem Elokim in everyone, with that smile that disarmed you right away, with that finding, whether it was medicine or sports, certainly, of course, Torah, and being Mekadeshim Shemayim, but he found that connection and he practiced that unity, not uniformity. He didn't necessarily agree with you, and he would argue or debate when you disagreed, because he wasn't asking for uniformity, but he knew and he lived for and he taught us and he teaches us the unity that Yerushalayim demands, and that Yerushalayim, if we want it to be rebuilt and we want to come back, we need to bring back once again. The Iyun Yaakov, source number 7, Yaakov Reisher, on page 4, was really one of the first to ask this question, L'chora Kasha, the Lama Kamar Akam Tzachar of Yerushalayim, Halo Hu Lo Kavid Midi, Rakar Havala Lameimar, Abar Kam Tzachar of Yerushalayim. Why is Kamtza blamed? It was Bar Kamtza. Ve'Shalomar Dasi Lashmin and Shavera Goreres Avera. Shayu Ove Bereim Zelazeva Yurgil Lasso Zem Zesudas Mereim. Alkain Ira Takalazu Ayadeim. He says, you know what the problem was? Frivolous parties. There's nothing wrong with getting together. There's nothing wrong with enjoying each other's company. There's nothing wrong with breaking bread or appropriately and moderately having a l'chaim. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But parties for the sake of exclusive parties that will be exclusive and excluding others, that's how the whole problem started. So Kamtza was party to the party. Kamtza was the intended guest, the one who was meant to be invited. Kamtza is on the inner circle with the host. On the rotation, it happened to be the host's turn to host the party. But next time it would be Kamtza. So Kamtza is part of this world, he's part of this movement that has a Sudas Mereim, that is not a wedding, it's not a bar mitzvah, not a siyum, not a Sudas Hodah, it's not marking a graduation or a milestone. You know what the purpose of the Suda was? A party for the sake of a party, not only for those who would be there, but to exclude those who wouldn't. Because if the party is not exclusive, then it wasn't a party. And says the Iyun Yaakov, that's how this began, and this is what Kamtza was party to, an accomplice of. Another subtle lesson from the story is that when you need to do something important like deliver invitations, don't ask somebody who's incompetent and incapable. Don't have somebody deliver the invitation who's not going to pay attention to detail. because as we'll see soon, details matter. So the shliach, the agent who delivered the invitation, is really the one who got it wrong and caused the problem. So the fact that there were these exclusive parties is what launched it all. This social environment, which was cliques and comets, and you're on the inside or you're on the outside, that's really what began it all. So not only was Bar Kamsa to blame, but Kamsa as well. The Imre Emes quotes Zayda, the Chiddushei Arim, source number 8. And he asked the same question. Makshem Olam B'Shlomo Bar Kamsa Shaper Nikra Churban Al Shemo, Hu Hilshin L'Romoyim, Aval Kamsa Ma'achet Shayikra HaChurban Al Shemo. What did Kamsa do wrong that it's his name goes down, he's attributed as well? So he says, he quotes the Zayda, the Chiddushei Arim, Dinei Gam Bar Kamsa Chasha Shemata Shliach V'Karosa B'Makom Kamsa. Now, Bar Kamsa is not stupid. He gets Kamsa's mail all the time. So this isn't the first time an invitation got mixed up. So Bar Kamsa gets the invite to the event of his arch nemesis, his enemy. So what does he say to himself? First thing, this probably is not meant for me. I'm getting Kamsa's email, right? There's another Seth Frolich. When I send the wrong email, I hear from him. There's another Judah Goldberg. Trust me, when I get one letter wrong in the email address, I hear from all the doppelgangers of the people I know who have very close names. Usually by like the third or fourth time they beg me to, can you just change it in your address book? So Bar Kamsa, not the first time he got the wrong mail, the wrong invitation. So Chishuv she'as latzma simenim yir besudas kamsim kein vadei balasuda shalach likra gamlo kedelis payeh. So he says to himself, look, I'll show up at the event. And here's the deal. If I come to the event and Kamsa's there also, so then I'll know the invitation was also for me because we both got invited. So it wasn't an accident. I didn't get the invitation instead of Kamsa. I got the invitation in addition to Kamsa. And if Kamsa's not there, then it must be the invitation was meant for him, not me. I'm going to turn right around, I'm going to back right out, and I'm going to go home. Ulam, Kamsa shayedida shabala suda, halach la suda afsha shlich lo yigi love lahazmin oso. But you know what happened? Kamsa's watching, and he hears from all of his friends, Tuesday night, you're going to be at the party? And he didn't get an invitation to the party, Kamsa, because it got mixed up. It went to Bar Kamsa. But Kamsa says, I didn't get the invite, but I got to be there. Because when the picture gets posted on social media, I need to be in the picture. I'm in the comets. I'm in the clique. I'm in the inner circle. I made the cut. I'm part of this social group of friends. So what did Kamsa do? He showed up uninvited. The kasher bar Kamsa baras Kamsa besuda haven shabala suda hizmin gamo so gedeles payes. So now Bar Kamsa comes to the party and he says to himself, "Oh, Kamsa's here. So the invitation was intended for me. Wow. I guess it's a gesture to reconcile. I guess we're going to make up. This is the best night of my life. We'll both be our Kamsa and Bar Kamsa." Because Kamsa went when he wasn't invited, that caused Bar Kamsa to misunderstand when he showed up, and that led to the entire thing. The Siyam Zakeni and the Chiddushei Arim concluded, and the conclusion of this is, don't show up unless you're invited. Don't make assumptions. Don't show up unless you're invited. Maybe it serves your social status and social needs more, but that's not a reason to show up when you're not invited, because Kamsa having shown up when he wasn't invited is what created the whole problem. The Yalkut Gershuni of Gershon Stern, source number 9, says the opposite. He says, Lanias Daiti in the 4th line, B'pshitas keven ha'gavra she'ovo ha'yakamsa ava tzu'udasa mistama kamsa ovo kvar yada mizeh she'ovo ose su'uda. Im kein hayalo leilech me'atzmo ala su'uda v'lo lahamten at she'yishlach achar shliach lazmino ala su'uda. Kamsa shouldn't have waited to be invited. He should have made it clear he was going to be there on his own. And you know what? Then the host would have never had to send out an invitation and got it all wrong. They come to diametrically opposed conclusions. The Chiddushei Arim says, don't show up where you're not invited. That's what led to it all. And the Yalkut Gershuni says, don't wait to be invited. Make clear that you want to be part of a simcha, that you want to celebrate, that you want to feel the joy of the other. And if Kamsa would have shown up even without needing the invitation to come, a shliach would have never been sent. The mix-up never would have happened. Everything would have been okay. Fascinating how they could come to diametrically opposed conclusions. But again, I draw the lesson of our dear friend, Baruch Tzvi, who at every simcha of all of ours was so happy, felt was no se besimchas chavero, like it was his own simcha. And particularly in the end, when it wasn't easy, to have the energy and the fortitude to even show up. wasn't always easy to drive a long distance to get to a wedding or to get to a simcha and to dance like he had no problem in the world, because if it was your simcha, whatever he was going through was not going to bring you down. He so enjoyed the simcha and the joy and the nachas from all of us. Really, I think, a model of how to not only be nosei ba'olim chavero, to not only feel the pain of your friend, but to be nosei b'simchas chavero. The Alter of Kelm says, which is harder, to feel the joy of a friend or the pain of a friend? The Alter of Kelm says, to feel the trouble of a friend, that's relatively easy. If it's so easy, more people should do it, but it's relatively easy. Why? When you hear, God forbid, that someone's going through a hard time, you know what the person's reaction is? Baruch Hashem, thank God that's not me. I'll cook a meal. I'll drive carpool. I'll give a ride. I'll help out, because at least, thank God, that's not me. But when you hear that someone's making a simcha, when you hear someone had success, when you hear something's going so right for someone else, you know what people instinctively say? Why not me? I really deserve it. That should be me. So the Alter of Kelm says, it's harder to be nosei b'simchas chavero than ba'ol chavero. But not for Brian. He was nosei b'simchas chavero. He was able to enjoy the joy and the geschmack and to elevate every one of our simchas that he attended and to invite us to do the same with his. The Maharsha says in source number 10, let's just go back to their names for a moment. Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. What does the word bar mean? Is it possible these two people whose invitations got mixed up were related? The Maharsha says, yeah, Bar Kamsa is the son of Kamsa. Talking about a father and a son. You want to know why Yerushalayim was destroyed? Because how could a father have a good friend who's not talking to his own son? If you're not talking to my kids, you're not talking to me. If you treat my children well, I love you. If you mistreat my children, you can do nothing right for me if you're on the outs with my children. This Kamsa is a good friend of the host, even though Bar Kamsa is not invited. What kind of a society is that? If there's such a breakdown of a fundamental relationship between parents and children, there's such a social divide that you say to your son, look, I'm so sorry you're left out. I'm sorry you're not invited. I'm sorry they posted all these things about you, but it's a really good party. But I got the invite. You don't mind if I go. Kamsa was ready to go to a party hosted by someone who left out his son Bar Kamsa. Now Rashi Dafka says the opposite. These are two separate people. They're not related. And he brings a proof, not for now. But the Maharsha says it's not a coincidence. It's Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, a father and son. A society that has such a breakdown between parents and children is a society that is destined to be destroyed. It's disintegrating and dissolving. It was the beginning of the end when Kamsa and a Bar Kamsa could have such division between them. One of the lessons that I think of all the time is Brian, both as a son and as a father. We've witnessed the Kibbut Avim, this week's Parsha, that he exhibited the incredible respect and admiration and love for his parents, and as a father, the unparalleled love and affection and effort, as we've spoken about, has been spoken about so many times, to coordinate at the hospital in the night, in between emergencies, to learn with the kids one by one, to learn, to laugh, to play, both as a son and as a father. What a role model of a parent-child relationship in both directions. To be mevater, to not be so exacting that it gets in the way of a relationship that should transcend everything else, that it shouldn't wait until it's too late to realize is more important than anything else, to fix, to heal, to appreciate, and to model. In the early years, when the kids were young, Brian would come to shul. We've described this so many times. I would describe Brian had children dripping and hanging off of everywhere, on his shoulders, under his arm, while making his tie, while coming into Ashkama or on Friday night. And he and I had a lot of healthy discussions about at what age do children belong in shul. And he was adamant. Didn't matter. I brought him a Rav Volben or Yaakov Kamenetsky, and what Mara Makomas, it didn't matter. He was his children with him, next to him in shul, hearing him davening with him together. There was nothing more important. There was nothing better or sweeter for him. So Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, says the Maharsha, you're talking about a father and son. And when that relationship breaks down, that's the end of society. That was the end of Yerushalayim. That was the end of the Jewish people. The Shef HaChaim, Rabbi Yehuda Habershtam, The great Kloisenberger Rebbe, Schus Yagen Aleinu, source 11, Shefa Chaim, he says, if he didn't say it, I could never say this. What he writes here, it was worth coming tonight to hear this. If he didn't say it, I could never say it. But I saw this in his Raiva Deraivin. He has a collection based on the parsha and based on which time of Shabbos that it was said over at Shalashidus, Raiva Deraivin. And he says the following. The Gemara Bamatzia tells us, L'chorva Yerushalayim ela she'emidu dineim al din Torah. You know why the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed? Because people prioritized their own rules over the rules of Torah. Their own hang-ups, their own rules, they prioritized over the rules of Torah. So what does that mean? So he applies it, the Kloisenberger Rebbe, to another statement of Chazal. The Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us that Nikiyei Hadash of Yerushalayim lo yinechnasem besuda elam ken yoden mi mesav imahim. The Nikiyei Hadas, the righteous, vigilant, scrupulous of Yerushalayim would not accept an invitation for a meal unless they knew who else was going to be there. Why? This wasn't a social issue. Because they observed many hidurim and chumras. They had a lot of personal stringencies in halacha, and those present might have compromised their personal stringencies. Says the Kloisenberger, but they took it too far. When your personal stringencies interfere and get in the way of being able to sit with a fellow Jew, you have inverted what is primary and with what's secondary. So ha'amidu dinaim al din Torah, their own rule, their own adopted rule that I don't eat unless I know who else is there because I have certain chumras, that got in the way, it interfered with, and it violated the din Torah. And the din Torah is, you sit with another Jew. Ha'amidu dinaim hainu adinim shalem al divrei Torah. They put this, they're being scrupulous and vigilant, they're being so careful, they're being so machmir, which are wonderful things to aspire to, but not if it interferes with being able to get along with a fellow Jew. And then the Kloisenberger Rebbe says that's the story of Kamsa, Ubar Kamsa. You see it from here. V'abdi b'zelek in the left column. Lama naka Kamsa bar Kamsa, the ma'ashami yishba b'Kamsa shenizkar shmo kegorim l'churban Yerushalayim. Why was Kamsa's name mentioned? As we've said, the whole story is really because of Bar Kamsa. Why did Kamsa go down? What was wrong with this host? You know what the cost of a party is? I don't know if it's open bar, alcohol, no alcohol. It's expensive. Meat or just chicken, fish. It's expensive. So how could it be that the host was so filled with hate for Bar Kamsa that he even turned down the offer to pay for the entire thing? You know how much hate has to be in the heart of somebody to turn down if they offer to pay for the entire event just to not have to leave? That's how much hate has to be in the heart. But it says, and why didn't the rabbi stand up and object? Why didn't they say, you can't have so much hate? Let him stay, let him sit. He belongs. We find sometimes it's permissible to hate. But why didn't they object? Well, the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa is an example of exactly this going wrong, where you don't want to come in if somebody's there because you're putting your personal rule ahead of ha'amidu dineim al din Torah, and that's the end of a society if our stringencies can get in the way. Brian was makbid on halacha. The front seat of his car was always overflowing with a pile of svarim. He was always carrying with his talis bag, svarim sticking out of it, preparing his next chabura. He loved learning halacha, and he was scrupulous in his practice of halacha, but never to the extent or in a way that would judge others or be superior to others or interfere or drive away or prevent developing a relationship with others. The Yismach Moshe, source 12, will skip because I want to conclude. He talks about what exactly caused the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Was it the sinas chinam or the failure of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha? Which one was it? And the story of Bar Kamsa answers. But there's another interpretation of the Shefa Chaim, the Kloisenberger Rebbe, elsewhere in Parshas Eikev, and he says the following, source 13. He says, you do a kushas ha'olam, he quotes the Yom Yaakov that we've seen in the Maharal. Why Kamsa's blame, not just Bar Kamsa. L'chora Balasuda Shazarak, it should be the host. It should have been the host and Bar Kamsa caused the destruction of Yerushalayim. Instead, it was Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. So he says, B'yom Tisha B'av Sha'avar, Last year, Tisha B'Av, says the Kloisenberger, Allah b'machshavasi l'taretz, I thought of an answer. She'as mashal sarkamtza hi mishim shaya chavero v'yidido shal ba'al su'uda. She'anuron shaya achzar she'ba'achzarim kenachash noshech. This host was vengeful, hateful, like a snake that bites, filled with such rage and hate that he couldn't even allow Bar Kamsa to stay. And Kamsa would be friends with such a person. That's why he too is named as part of the problem. He should have given him rebuke privately without anyone hearing. If the host could be filled with such hate that he couldn't even allow Bar Kamsa to stay, then Kamsa shouldn't have been friends with him either. We learn a big lesson, says the Shef Chaim, the Kloisenberger, who sadly lived this when his wife and 13 children were brutally murdered by the Nazis. Yimach Shemam v'Zichram. The Kloisenberger lived and survived a world that understood indifference. When good people are indifferent to hate, then hate is allowed to pervade, hate is allowed to spread. Kloisenberger was a victim of that. When good people, it's not the wicked that destroy the world. It's the good people who are indifferent, who look the other way, who don't want to get involved, who are willing to stay friends because they don't want to rock the boat. So my friend is hateful and vengeful and splinters and is cliquey and breaks from community. My friend is apart and I don't want to say anything. Kamsa was guilty because he was associating with someone who was filled with such hate. And indifference is not an answer. Indifference is not an excuse not wanting to get involved. That's what Kamsa was guilty of, and that's what the Rabbanan were guilty of, because the Rabbanan just sat there. Rabbanan just sat there, and the Gemara blames them. But the final idea and message I want to share, as we spend tonight reflecting on our dear and beloved friend and in his memory, is the Ben Yehoyada of Yosef Chaim, the Ben Ish Chai, source 14, bottom of page 7, because he makes a fascinating observation. Quotes the Maharsha, he quotes Rashi disagreeing. He proves if it were the son, it would have been Kamsa Ubrei. Kamsa Ubar Kamsa is two separate people. If it really was Kamsa, if Bar Kamsa was his son, it would have been Kamsa Ubrei. That's his raya, that's his proof. But he says, Odin Yerli b'siyata d'shmai kavanas hashas, Masha Amar Kamsa Bar Kamsa hainu retzono lomar b'shvil shelo dikte kashamea lahavin v'lasim libo b'shinoi sheyesh bein teves Kamsa u'bein teves Bar Kamsa. Nistavev chorban Yerushalayim. V'kavanas balamaymer b'zel lamednu shetzarach adam l'daktek b'lashono heitev. A person has to be very careful. Because if you break down the story, you know what it came down to? 2 letters. Beis Resh. The entire difference between Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, the entire mix-up and difference that led to the destruction of Yerushalayim, the exile of our people, what we continue to suffer today, is a mix-up because of 2 letters. A Beis and a Resh. Bar. Kamsa versus Bar Kamsa. 2 letters. And says the Ben Yehoyada, the lesson for us is, we think, what's the big deal? I shared a little bit of Lashon Hara. I was a little bit hateful and judgmental. I called someone a little bit of a name. I contributed a little bit to Machlokas. It's just that, just a little bit. My words, do they really matter? It was a couple letters, a couple sentences. It was just a little bit. Says the Ben Yehoyada, it's a little bit. A little bit of hate is hate. A little bit of judgment is judgment. A little bit of Machlokas is Machlokas and Pirud. That little difference of a Beis and a Resh can bring about destruction, can bring about the end. We have to be so incredibly careful. Chachamim hisaru b'divreichem. Chachamim are cautioned to be vigilant and careful with all of their words. They have to be measured. They have to be used to lift up, not to knock down. We have to be positive, not negative. Our words have to be benachas. They're nishma and they're listened to, they're heard, they're heeded when they are benachas, when they're offered in a gentle and a loving and a positive way. Baruch Tzvi, our dear friend Brian, he was Divrei Chachamim, and it was benachas, always benachas, positive, and a smile. Even if he was giving you some feedback or some pushback or some healthy, constructive criticism, but with love, the love that emanated and that came. It was measured, and it was careful, and it was delivered with love. And that's what's necessary, because little things can destroy everything. And I ended with this article I came across a few months ago. It's a powerful article. It's worth reading and worth developing more in another context. But the author talks about the end of his marriage was because of dirty dishes. He writes in the fourth paragraph, the reason my marriage fell apart seems absurd when I describe it. My wife left me because sometimes I leave dishes by the sink. It makes it seem ridiculous. It makes me seem like a victim of unfair expectations, but it wasn't. The dishes, it was what they represented. We didn't go down in a fiery explosion. We bled out the 10,000 paper cuts. Quietly, slowly. She knew that something was wrong. I insisted everything was fine. That's how it ended. And he talks all about that marriages don't thrive or survive, or they're not destroyed by big moments and big things. It's the seemingly insignificant, seemingly inconsequential. It's the little things that add up. It's the message and messaging of the little things that matter, that can either fortify or they can either destroy. He writes, there's only one reason I'll ever stop leaving that glass by the thing, because the lesson I learned much too late. I love and respect my partner, and it really matters to them. I wanted my wife to agree that when you put life in perspective, a drinking glass by the sink is simply not a big problem. She cause a fight. I thought she should recognize how petty and meaningless it was in the grand scheme of life. I repeated that train of thought for the better part of 12 years, waiting for her to agree, but she never did. She never agreed. I was arguing about the merits of a glass by the sink, but for my wife, it wasn't about the glass, or it wasn't about the laundry on the floor, or trying to get out to work for caring for our son. It was about consideration. Suddenly, this moment is no longer about something as benign and meaningless as dirty glass. Now this moment is about a meaningful act of love and sacrifice. It's worth looking at the entire article. It's true about marriage, but it's true about friendship, and it's true about all of our relationships in our lives. They matter. The little things, they matter. The way we deliver them, the way we speak, the love, the connection, the bond, the unity, the entire story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa are all lessons that Brian's life represented. Who he was and how he lived, how he's remembered, and how we continue to learn and to live. Jay Keen, who's here, shared with me, so sadly, Melissa just got up from Shiva today, but several months ago, Jay was sitting Shiva for the loss of his mother. And he was sitting in Brooklyn, but going home to Cedarhurst at night. And a friend called from Teaneck who wanted to come pay a Shiva call. And Jay told him, so sorry, I already left Brooklyn. It was 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, and I'm headed back to Cedarhurst where I'm sleeping. So the friend was quiet for a moment on the other side, and Jay said, it's the effort, the gesture, go back to Teaneck, go home. But instead, Jay showed up in Cedarhurst, and shortly after him, this friend who had made his way already from Teaneck to Brooklyn, and from Brooklyn to Cedarhurst, and from Cedarhurst back to Teaneck, it's easier to fly back to Florida. But he showed up nonetheless, and he made the effort, and he made his way all the way to Cedarhurst to pay the Shiva call. And Jay said when he got there, this person was a mutual friend with Brian. He knew Brian. And Jay said, why'd you come? I told you. It's the thought that matters. It's the thought that counts. I told you it was okay. You didn't know that we had already left. You made your way to Brooklyn. We were good. I told you to go home, go to Teaneck. And he said in that moment, I stopped and I asked myself, what would Brian do? And the answer was clear. I kept driving. And Jay said, call me to tell me this story. He said it wasn't just a friend from Teaneck who paid him the Shiva call when he lost his mom. It was Brian. And through that friend, Brian was still paying the Shiva call. And every time that we can find unity and love and camaraderie and connection, every time we have the koach to be mevater, to let something go because it's just not worth it, to end machlokas instead of to feed it, to love our parents and to be the best parents in the world that we can be. Every time we learn these lessons, then Brian is still alive, he's still here, he's still paying Shiva calls, and he's still dancing at weddings, and he's still giving chaburas, and he's still teaching Torah, and he is still alive and well, even 4 years after his body is gone. It's up to us to keep him alive, to continue to learn his lessons, for which we are eternally grateful to him forever. Our dear friend who will never forget, Baruch Tzvi ben Ruvei Nassim, and this is Yahrzeit. His neshama should have an aliyah. We thank the Galbots for sponsoring, and they invite everyone to make brachas in his memory at refreshments in the back. Thank you for coming.